was so satisfying to have people who did not expect you to be interested in all of them, in their past, who they had been, and how that was connected. That was who they still were. Everyone was treating them like they'd always been an old person who didn't matter.
Wow.
Right? And I was interested in starting from the point of view of who have you been throughout your whole life, and that's continuous with who you are now. It's not who you were. That's part of you, too. You are not the person who used to be this or that. You are the person who has experience as a this or that. Yes, you follow?
Yes, yes, of course.
And so by just that investment in the person opened up the patients in an individual way. I just found that so satisfying. Right, and I think what I've come to learn now that I didn't understand then, why they are different than younger patients. And one of the ways in which they were different from younger patients was that they aren't invested in building career, looking for the new love. You know, they've already formed their partnerships, they've had a career. They're not so involved in being busy and with external activities. They no longer rely on external activities. And so they're actually more emotionally available because this is a time in life that's more internal than external. And that is one of the most satisfying aspects of working with the older patient. And it's a misconception that they're less treatable, less motivated. They're more motivated. They're living inside all the time. And it has to start with, to work with older patients, you must believe that psychic development is lifelong. You must have that belief. If you do not have that belief, you cannot do the work. One of the things I think is really important is that we have to develop a developmental model of aging that is not linear. If we think forwards and backwards, progress, regression, we are off track completely. And we don't progress in a line and go backwards. We work in different spheres of challenge within the psyche, and that it's more spherical than it is kind of linear front and back. So I think of it as a phase of development. Okay, and the phase cannot be defined by age. Idea of how I define late life, that's what I've chosen to call it, late life, and it scares people, but I actually do think we should think of this as end of life period. That it is a period that it's the end of life. And the reason I say that is I think it's a period that's defined by when external changes, including health, retirement status, capacities, losses, characterize and bring the inner world into awareness that the most important intrapsychic issues at that time are finite time, mortality, and end of life, that these are the challenges of that period when the inner life begins to have to work through those issues in a way with an intensity that it never has in previous stages. That's when I think of you as in this last developmental stage. But actually, it's this working through that allows you to live life to the very end and find love. Find the loving part of yourself is more released, I think. Just like any time you work through your negative transference, the love emerges as you work through the negative. This allows the positive in a genuine way to emerge, not in a fake kind of way. And what I find brings people is their regrets about the way they've treated their important objects in their life.
Okay.
And I think one of the things I would like to explore more, but I have already learned from my patients, at the end of life is filled with certainties and uncertainties. It's certain you will die at the end, but how will you die? When will you die? What will it be like? What comes after? There's much uncertainty, but one of the certainties is actually that you don't die with someone. You die alone.
Yes.
For me, you die alone with your inner objects.
Yes.
That's it. And so if your inner objects are persecutory out of a sense of your own sense of guilt and failure to repair the loving part of the relationship, then you're going to the end of your life in a very scary situation where you're alone with persecutory inner objects. So, this is my point. It's that it's about a realignment, a reworking, and maybe the final opportunity for reparation with your damaged, what you worry are damaged objects inside of you. And you bring them to health. You find love. You find the goodness even of the bad object, is how I put it. You find what little goodness of the bad object that you can just enables you to be free inside, which people have been distracted. They've been trying to solve this problem by being successful in their outer life. Having a great career, getting accolades. So this is also the person who's vulnerable in late life because you're no longer getting accolades and achievements, and at the end of the day you can't say, I did this and this and this and this. And I do think that many older patients are not so fearful of death. And they don't even have to be religious. They don't believe in an afterlife, but they often feel they've lived a long life, and they're ready to make room for they see the importance of the younger generation in terms of who shapes the world. They no longer feel they're shaping the world. They're not so fearful of death, but for the same reason we just discussed, they are very fearful of dying. So and they're very fearful of being dependent. So the patients who come to our office, I think, have troubled inner relations with their original objects. So in the period of their dependence, so that they did not have a good relation with the primary object. Therefore, when they see themselves becoming dependent, it terrifies them. They don't understand it, but they automatically anticipate that dependence means being dependent on a bad object. And one of the things that I also found very interesting in the work is that often the children are the ones who recommend the older person to come to the analysis. And the children are often very good and trying their best to really be good caregivers to their parent. But the parent, they've become the transference object. As they become dependent on the children are now treated like the transference object, and the patients are feeling persecuted by the children, and the children are pulling their hair out saying, I don't know what more I can do for my parent. I've done this, and I've done that, and I've done that. So as you rework, as the patient comes to understand that these are their inner relationships with their early dependent relations, their relations with their children often improve better than they've ever been. Better than they've ever been. So you are helping the children as well as helping your own patient, because now that they can really appreciate each other, that the patient becomes able to actually see the child and see the child's love and allow themselves to feel loved. They have only been able, out of their own inner guilt, to feel persecuted. And it's a terrible cycle, because then they do mistreat the children, and they believe they deserve to not be loved. So as they rework the inner relationship to the early dependent objects, they are more comfortable with their dependency on their, and so they're not so scared of dying. But I think what we can do as analysts is make the person feel they're at peace inside with their inner object and have good relations with their external object. And I think those are some of the issues of late life, which is your illusions of control over your life, your narcissistic desires for potency, omnipotence. Those are the areas in which we must face the reality that we are not potent and we don't control things. There are many things in life we don't control, like when will death come and what will it be like, and and so those are the crucial issues of this period of life, and that's, I think, another reason why so many people may have difficulty with that period of life. The narcissistic blow, the balance to your inner balance in relation to your strivings and what is possible really has to be reworked. It is a huge period of loss. There are actual losses in your life. You lose spouses, you lose colleagues, you lose maybe children or grandchildren. You lose your best friends, either through death or through illness. So there's a great deal of loss, obviously, in this period. And many of the other aspects, like retiring, for some people is opening up a new phase. For some others, it's a loss of your sense of potency. Likewise, economically, you're not an earner anymore. And of course, at least in many societies, you're sort of marginalized, so you have a loss of status. You don't have the importance. So there are many losses, too. So if you've had some, difficulties with mourning, this is a difficult period. But I think we shouldn't try to talk about that period without acknowledging how powerful the amount of loss is in that period of time. I think that frightens people, the idea of so much loss. And so about the body as an object, so what I've been thinking about is another way patients often present is that the external object that they're competitive with and feel demeaned by is their former body. So they come in and they just want to talk about how they aren't what they used to be. I used to be strong in this way. I used to be able to walk. I used to be able to sing. I used to be able to go on photographic expeditions. I was this. I was that. And what you see is that they're actually being persecuted and intimidated by their former self, which is now split off from their current self. And what the work has to do is to be able to reclaim and integrate into a whole. But when you're in a persecutory state, your former self is part of what is persecuting you. So you can think of it, I often think of it in terms of ego ideal is one way to think about it, that the reality, the external reality of who you are becomes so far from what you've rigidly held on to as your ego ideal, that there's this gap now persecutes you, and that what we see in health is as you rework things intrapsychically, the person begins to, the gap narrows, the ego ideal becomes more appropriate to the current situation. So instead of saying, I used to run 2 miles, you say, I'm the only 85-year-old who still walks a mile, so that you still respond to the externals, but intrapsychically you feel different about it. So for some women, the climacteric is a crisis. I think some women, it's not such a crisis.
But that depends on
the inner life.
Of course.
So I think, again, aging, my definition is when the body changes, the changes in your external life and the number of losses all interact in such a way that the issues that emerge for your inner life are the finite quality of life, and mortality, vulnerability, lack of control over life. When these characteristics of late life all come together, and this is the inner shift to working through, that's what I call late life aging. When those come forward, and so it can be a cancer patient at 46.
Yes.
So I think a 46-year-old cancer patient has a great deal, may have more in common with an 85-year-old than another 85-year-old who's very healthy. Yes. You know, so it's a combination of the changes in the body and how we experience them that then focus your intrapsychic life on this finite aspect of life. That we love the endless possibilities. We love the dreaming of someday I'll travel here, someday I'll do this when I write my book, yes. You know, when I have more time, yes. You know, to devote to my friends and
investment of future.
We love that.
The future.
We love that. But this is what this period of life is not about. That this is a period of life where you will still dream, but you also know that it's time to also say, well, maybe I won't get to so-and-so, or maybe that book isn't ever going to be written. Yes. And, you know, and I think that these are the qualities that define that aging, if that's what you meant by aging. Yeah. No, it's the perfect time where you switch from external orientation to internal orientation. And I think we all share that enthusiasm for working with that period of life for that very reason.
Very well. Okay. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's
been a pleasure. Okay. Well, I guess I would probably be consistent with what we've been saying, that if we've been relying on very vulnerable defenses to feel happy about life, that oh, if I achieve that will make me happy. Or if I have this number of friends, that's what's going to... As long as we're relying on external achievement is what makes us happy, then we're terribly vulnerable and we're not so wise. We're still going for omnipotence.
Yes, yes.
We rely on omnipotence. Yes. We rely on being in a controlling position. I think the wisdom arises from feeling whole despite knowing you don't control things. Yes. Your potency is limited. Things change and you can't control them. And I think wisdom emerges from the person who can experience their life as the full cycle. They feel continuous with their past. They believe they have a future. They look to the next generation. That's generativity. This is the other thing that emerges in a good psychoanalytic experience with an older patient. Instead of the investment in the self and everything being about the self, you don't feel competitive so much with the younger generation. You are truly ready to feel that you will live on in them.
Yes.
You know, again, it's not. Maybe it verges on an omnipotent fantasy, but in a way, this is how we will live on. That we will be held in the inner life of those people we've touched in their inner lives.